I would be surprised if more than 20 or 30% of the Bitcoin billionaires are known publicly. I think there's a bunch of them that we have no idea who they are. And I think that's a good thing. Increasingly, as we get hyper-Bitcoinization and people start using sats more, it's really addictive to zap people, you know, that in Nostr you just like flick someone like a little bit of money. You're talking about 1% of a dollar cent or something. Like that's how small you can go. It's very fun. To have social media that is very seamlessly integrated with money is almost like a new experience. And to be able to have that without the government leaning over you and deciding that, oh no, your social credit score is too low, now you're not allowed to buy the music anymore, or whatever it is that you're not allowed to do. To have that freedom, I think, is going to be infectious.
The Blockware Marketplace is super cool. Basically, Mason's firm already helps investors and institutional investors on Wall Street get into Bitcoin mining with his giant data centers, but he wanted to make it even easier for the average person to get into this. So now with the Blockware Marketplace, with the click of a button, you can buy your own Bitcoin miner from the comfort of your own home and have it instantly start mining for you straight into a Bitcoin wallet of your choosing. On the Blockware Marketplace, you can see a bunch of miners for sale, you can see what the miner is, the price, the data center location that the miner is located in, the hash rate, the estimated revenue you're going to be making based on the current price of Bitcoin and stuff, and there are miners in all price ranges listed on there right now. Once you see a miner you want to look into more, simply click on it, and then you can see the serial number, how long it's been online for, you can see charts of the miner's historical performance, and once you're ready to buy a miner, simply click buy, follow the instructions, and then that miner that is already online in their data center will be instantly assigned to you. And that's it. You are now mining Bitcoin, getting all the benefits of mining without ever having to do any of the setup or maintenance yourself. So go to marketplace.blockwaresolutions.com to take a peek at all the miners that are listed for sale right now.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Blockware Intelligence Podcast. This week I have on Tuur Demeester. Tuur, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, glad to have you. I want to jump right into it. On Twitter, I saw Adam Back made a bet that Bitcoin would hit 100K by the 2024 halving. What are your thoughts? Crazy? Not crazy?
Yeah, I don't think it's crazy. It's a bit of a. It's also the thing is the big thing that needs to happen is Bitcoin needs to break above like 42,000 ish. Like we need to break out of that range, and then it's more likely that it's off to the races. So. To me, the big pivotal moment is going to be that, like, when do we actually break out of this range? And then from there, it can either go super fast or it can go like reasonably fast, but I don't think it's crazy. I think that there's just so many macro wins that are positioned correctly, and also so many new buyers coming into the Bitcoin market. Also, there's a lot of noise that has disappeared out of the market, which is, the crypto stuff, like all the altcoins, who even talks about, I forget the name, but the gifts that people were selling each other. I don't know why I can't think of it. The JPEG markets that we had, and
like NFTs.
Sorry, yeah, exactly. Like who even talks about NFTs anymore? So yeah, like I think that there's more clarity, and so that means that there's less options, right? Bitcoin is the thing. Bitcoin is where it's all happening. So yeah, I'm just super bullish. Anyway, it's a bit of a coin toss how that bet is going to work out. But Adam has actually a good feel for the markets. I definitely. I would not bet against him.
Yeah, that's why, I don't necessarily like discussing like specific price calls, but it was from Adam Back, who's like, pretty well-respected name in the Bitcoin world, obviously. So I thought it was interesting that he did something like that. I don't remember him doing something like that in the past, saying a specific price by a specific time.
Yeah, he's happy to take a bet here or there. You're right. He hasn't done that often. But yeah, he's been trading since he was in college. Like people don't know this. They always see him as like kind of like the more academic type guy, but he's good. He's a good market operator.
Yeah, very cool. I saw you also you tweeted something interesting that I definitely agree with that. I don't think a lot of people outside the Bitcoin space understand maybe, but, or even inside the Bitcoin space per se. But you said, I work to be psychologically prepared for the extremes in Bitcoin. I guess, what did you mean by that and why?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's preparation is so important psychologically because we are social animals and we respond to our environment, and it's easy to sit here in your chair and be like, oh, when Bitcoin whatever hits 200,000, I'm gonna do XYZ, and basically telling yourself, I'm gonna do all the right things, I'm gonna make all the right moves, I'm gonna sell at the top and buy at the bottom. But what is hard to take into account is the general atmosphere of all the people around us, like people in the street, people online, people on TV, and that impacts us hugely. And that's why it's so hard to do the right thing when the time is there to do it. And so that's why, for me, preparation is really key, because you got to kind of brace yourself to go against the tide, to buy at the lows and to maybe lighten up a bit or sell at the tops. And of course, you can never directly nail it, but you want to. And again, oh, so you first of all, you can't directly nail it. You might not even want to do those things. Like even just to buy and hold, it might be good to be prepared for the volatility so that you don't panic sell, or you don't basically get shaken out, right? Of your positions. Or if if you're bullish on the top side of the cycle, that you don't load up on debt, right? That you don't over leverage, for example, in times like that.
Yeah, I definitely completely agree. I mean, I feel like it's critical that you be prepared for both more downside and more upside than you expect, because you want to be a buyer of last resort if Bitcoin just wicks super low, like something like March 2020.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, exactly. Or again, or not to panic, because if you're panicking in that time, the consequences are way bigger, right? Than if you panic, sell the same dollar amount at any other time. Yeah, I forgot if I was going to say more.
Yeah,
Mm.
no, I think that was perfect. You also reminded me of just being prepared and like getting caught in the moment when Bitcoin's in like a massive bull cycle. I think Pierre Richard, who I'm a huge fan of, and think he does a lot of great work for Bitcoin. But I remember in the past he said like in 2013 and 2017, like he thought like hyper Bitcoinization was like pretty much here and right around the corner, and obviously it wasn't quite yet. But pretty funny to think it's it's very easy for Bitcoiners to get caught up during the bull cycle, myself
Yeah,
included.
no, yeah. Yeah, Pierre's a legend, and but like nobody's immune to these emotional highs. And the cool thing is, though, that we have this great community and we can just learn from each other and keep our heads cool when we probably need to be. Mm.
Definitely, 100%. I kind of want to hear. So I know you've been involved with Bitcoin for quite some time. It'd be awesome to hear about like the early days of Bitcoin for someone that got in,
Mm.
2020 or this past bull cycle. They've only seen Bitcoin from what it is today. What was the early days of Bitcoin? What was it like?
Yeah, it's I'm trying to find like kind of analogies or something. I mean, probably if I had to compare it, I would have to come up with an example of today, 2023, something that's really niche and that is not like that you might not even know what it is if I bring it up. It's like, oh, it's like this, right? Because the internet was also still a little bit different back then, like 2011, 2010, like social media was there. It was, Twitter existed. I think I got my Twitter account in 2011 or something, but it was very small. So it's weird, like the phenomena online were sometimes smaller, and then the platforms where people would share them on, like that would be like forums and stuff. Forums were really big. If you go to Bitcoin Talk, you can actually travel in time. If you go to Bitcoin Talk and you find some of the older threads, and actually Also, like the Nakamoto Institute, which Pierre has articles on, and Michael Goldstein has done a phenomenal job gathering all that stuff. So there's a lot of forum threads where Satoshi himself was also active on in 2009, 10, 11. So yeah, very, very. It was definitely a global phenomenon. I mean, it was more like the tech countries. There's definitely engineers from the UK, from the US, some Israeli involvement early on, even um, the Netherlands, like people that were strong in cryptography. But yeah, the first conference I went to was in London in 2012, and I was the only like market guy there. Like there was just everybody was a coder or a kind of a tech entrepreneur type, maybe. But even those were really in the minority. It was mostly just like open source enthusiasts who would go there. Um, and I remember Bitstamp, they were like sponsoring the lanyards of that conference. These are like college kids. They're like 21, 22 years old. By the way, Bitstamp is an exchange. It still exists in I think it started in the Baltic, but one of the Baltic republics, and it's basically a European exchange. Um, and then you had companies like very blockchain.com was the biggest at the time, and they did some like blockchain analytics, like, and they had a wallet, and that was that was it. There was also Mulvad, who was like Swedish VPN. I met a guy who was running that company, Swedish VPN provider. So he was just running a little tech company, and then he was interested in Bitcoin on the side. I think already then you had like localbitcoins.com, which was like a peer-to-peer website. It's like a way to find somebody else who wants to buy Bitcoin in person, and then you go meet in a Starbucks. So those guys were already online. And then like Max Kaiser was there. He was one of the, oh, actually, yeah, he was there. So that was one of the only other like kind of, non pure technical people. So yeah,
What
it's
time
just a kind of
period
a
was this?
hodgepodge, like libertarian. You could buy like the little Casasius coins for like $20. They're now worth like $50,000 or something. Sorry, you were saying?
I was just gonna say, like, what time period exactly was like this first conference and
So all
era?
that is 2012. Yeah, I
Okay.
first learned about Bitcoin 2011. I interviewed some people. I started publishing some research, but then my first actual event was 2012. And then 2013 is when you had like the first 1,000 people conference in Silicon Valley. Like that was kind of like people were talking about that as like maybe this is going to be like those very early internet conferences where a lot of things came together. And then from 2014 is when we had the bubble to $1,000. So then like a lot more people came in. But yeah, there's like Barry Silbert and some of the name like the Winklevi, they came in and like the actually no, they already spoke at 2013. Those guys are early too. Um, but yeah, just a very, very small scene and very amicable. If to give an idea, like if any one of your listeners is involved with Nostr, with like the new social media platform, which is it's not a company, right? It's just a protocol. That kind of energy where there's lots of collaboration and enthusiasm, and there's no like bitter wars or it's just like people having fun and excited for what's to come.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah,
Mm.
Noster's pretty cool, pretty interesting. I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that? Do you see Noster really gaining some serious traction? I feel like it did for a small amount of time, and then Twitter like came back, and a lot of people went back to Twitter. But what do you think?
I mean, yeah, I feel like something's happening. I do think something's happening. I think that on the one hand, social media is becoming just, I mean, obviously it always was centralized, but now we're entering an era of more censorship in general. Like it's almost like we're having a replay of the 1980s or the 1940s in the world at large, more censorship. But now, so increasingly, we do have these tools of peer-to-peer communication and censorship-resistant tools. So it does make sense to me that those tools are going to get better and better, and maybe also we'll have companies that start helping, operate these things, so that just how like you could download a very like I remember first torrenting files as a college student in like 2003, 4 using BitTorrent, and it was very complicated. You had to like do research and like tweak settings in your computer, and it was all kind of pretty grassroots. And there was only one or two or three different clients. Whereas now, if you want to torrent, it's just like 3 clicks of the mouse, and you're up and running. Like it's not rocket science at all. So I think that kind of future, where you have kind of a shadow economy, like there will be like, oh, the official social media where you can do all the politically correct stuff, and then if you really want to, dig in, or you have some kind of esoteric interest, then maybe you're going to use those other platforms. And then increasingly, as we get hyper Bitcoinization and people start using Sats more, it's really addictive to zap people. That in Nostr you just like flick someone like a little bit of money, and like I mean, you're talking about 1% of a dollar cent or something. Like that's how small you can go. It's very fun. Um, and so yeah, to have social media that is very seamlessly integrated with money is almost like a new experience. And to be able to have that without the government, leaning over you and deciding that, oh no, your social credit score is too low. Now you're not allowed to buy the music anymore, or whatever it is that you're not allowed to do. To have, that freedom, I think, is going to be infectious.
It's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I guess the way that I've thought about it is it's nice to have a backup now that if Twitter for some reason got completely compromised and went full on out censorship, especially like for Bitcoiners or for whoever, now we have a backup that we can go to and still communicate with each other.
Yeah, and there's a parallel there, right, where Bitcoin already is the backup for the financial system, and so yeah, Nostr, I think, and who knows, maybe some other protocol as well is going to be that backup for the official white collar internet, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a good point. I guess another question that I had going back to the early conference days or Bitcoin in 2012 or so is was that like a big portion of the community, or like the quote unquote holders back then? Like, were they very actively involved in going to conferences, or were they or was a lot of the coins just like held by random people all throughout the world that weren't really doing anything in person at the time?
I've always suspected that even in the early days, there's a large amount of people that never go to social events, and that are just in the background, that work, that use pseudonyms, that just live their life, and that have for whatever reason have attach great value to privacy. Maybe they already have a family with kids, and they or maybe they live in a country where they could be. That's often the case. Like for Americans, it's something that is, I think, often underestimated, how rare it is to feel as safe as you do in the US, having property, showing that you have property, talking about it, whatever. If you live in Brazil or Russia or who knows where, it's front and center, thinking about, okay, if I talk about this, can I be a target? And for a lot of people, they decide, no, it's not worth it. I'm going to be discreet. And so yeah, I know people that have never, that are wealthy and that have never expose themselves by talking about it on social media, with things attached to their name, that always like communicate in pseudonyms. So yeah, I feel like there's maybe even today, we know for a fact there are Bitcoin billionaires. We know, but just by the numbers, running the numbers, like by by how the coins are distributed. But I would be surprised if more than 20 or 30% of the Bitcoin billionaires are known publicly. I think there's a bunch of them that we have no idea who they are, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's all. It's crazy to think about. On that note of pseudonyms, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but have you always been public with your persona and your thoughts in the Bitcoin world, or have you been private and used pseudonyms in the past? Hey everyone, this week I want to talk about Stampseed. This is very cool metal plate where you can literally stamp your Bitcoin seed phrase with this hammer that they sell you into this metal plate. This is a must-have for all Bitcoin holders. If you have taken self-custody of your Bitcoin, you want to make sure you've recorded your seed phrase on something that is fireproof, waterproof, and time resistant. This is a great product for Bitcoiners who have taken self-custody and want that extra level of security and resiliency to store their Bitcoin. So if you are interested in this product, definitely check out stampseed.com. Use code Blockware15 for 15% off the entire website.
Well, if I had, would I say that?
Exactly.
No, but I don't know why. I think because I already was an analyst. I already had a public profile as an analyst, doing my newsletter. I didn't really grow up in that culture of like cryptography and cypherpunks. Like I was more like the libertarian world where people don't use that many pseudonyms. Like because my specialization was economics and the business cycle, and so that's just more an academic setting. So it's more like it was almost already too late. Once I was out, I was kind of like, yeah, let's just keep going. Well, I'll just move myself to a safer place rather than try to reverse engineer being public. And so yeah, that's why I live in Texas.
Yeah, nice, very cool. It also, like, this conversation of privacy and pseudonymity reminded me of Trace Mayer, who went dark for debatable reasons, I guess. But do you think that over time we could see more Bitcoiners follow in the steps of something like Trace Mayer? Not doing some Mimblewimble coin shill or whatnot, but just kind of like going off, being prolific podcasters or Twitter personalities and just all of a sudden just disappearing. I guess Nick Szabo has kind of done that to some extent.
Yeah, I think so. I think, sometimes people's life just changes. They start having different priorities. The trade-off might work out differently all of a sudden. Also, I mean, honestly, we have seen a lot more leanings toward canceling people and censoring and suing. All these lawsuits, like with Craig Wright, for example, like really ugly stuff. So we first saw some people go off the radar back in 2016, I would say, is when the block size wars started heating up, and there were some really very nasty threats exchanged, and all of a sudden that like amicable atmosphere turned very ugly. And then for some people, it's no longer worth it, and they might still contribute to Bitcoin or be involved in all kinds of ways because it's becoming a big world now. But there's different ways to do that than to put out tweets and reports and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. On that note of the block size war and you being around since 2012, how has like the narratives or your view of Bitcoin evolved over the years? Because I would imagine, I've said this before on podcasts and talking to people, that like when I first read about Bitcoin, it was the Nakamoto Institute, and I was like, this makes a lot of sense, but it's just some like random blog on the internet that I don't really, it's not like, in Bloomberg or some like academic peer-reviewed paper. And so over time, the education and like research, I feel like, has gotten much better. But from your perspective, like what resources were there in 2012? And then I guess probably the lack of resources, did that, make your vision or your view of Bitcoin change over, the next 10 plus years?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it would have been amazing if like the Nakamoto Institute was there early on. It's a fantastic first place to land if you're new. I'd be curious to hear how you ran into that, and also beyond that, like there's so many great books nowadays. Like there was zero books back then. and there was zero like educators. You really had to just go talk to the engineers directly. The Bitcoin Talk, like I remember spending a lot of time. I mean, I have some posts there, but I didn't feel like I had much to contribute. I would just read a lot. And then what would be very helpful is just to go to an event and talk to people in person and get a bit of a feel for, because even back then there were some crazy people where maybe they were well-meaning, but you couldn't always rely on their ideas or how they saw things. So you just had to. There wasn't really a shortcut. You had to just really drink from the fire hose and try to take in as much as possible. And I mean, there would have been a shortcut had I been like a security researcher, like a real hardcore coder, somebody like Dan Kaminsky or something, like a somebody who really knows all the vectors of cyber attacks, and because then you can look at the code and see for yourself, like, wow, this is built like a nuclear power plant. Like, this is really, really solid. So I always had to go and try to identify people like Dan to then, so that just took a lot more digging to make sure I'm not just in some dead end of somebody who talks about themselves like they're important, but actually whose opinion is not that valuable. But yeah, so I was lucky. For example, early on, I did an interview with Peter Weule, who has to this day contributes to Bitcoin, and who was a core developer even back in 2011. So he explained some basics to me, and then I started following him on. There was a what's it called? Not Substack, but that place where Stack Overflow, I think, that place where coders go with questions.
Yeah.
I think it's Stack Overflow. So he answered like 300 questions about Bitcoin, and those are also still online. So those kind of places were really helpful for people like me, where you just had simple questions like how does the difficulty get adjusted, or all these questions that we all have around how Bitcoin works.
Yeah, I think there's like a Bitcoin specific like stack. It's like Stack Exchange or Stack Overflow, and like those are some really good technical answers to some pretty interesting questions. And
so some of those answers are 10 years old and they're still great. Yeah,
exactly. That's cool. Yeah, and I guess for your topic on Nakamoto Institute, I found it, I think, just DMing Pierre Richard back in 2017 when I first heard about Bitcoin. Kept badgering him, and he was like, go read this, and I was like, okay.
Yeah, that's amazing, because that's it just cuts through so much of the noise. It's so well curated, and also more and more, I feel like almost in every domain there is so much value in just studying the beginnings of something, of a movement, of a philosophy, even of an individual author. Like, if you kind of understand where they come from, everything falls into place so much easier than if you're just, there's a lot of noise today, but how do you separate signal from noise? And it's like, well, early on there was probably more signal because there was less money involved. So yeah, like Hal Finney and the early cypherpunks, like reading their stuff, I think people are not going to stop doing that.
Yeah, great points. I'm curious if so, again, like, some people listening to this may be relatively new to Bitcoin. And one thing that I like about over time is like we've developed more clear and concise narratives, kind of like we're talking about, as to like what's the value proposition of Bitcoin. So I'm curious, how would you explain to someone that, still thinks Bitcoin is some sort of bubble or Ponzi scheme, how would you explain Bitcoin to them in a very clear and concise way?
I'd probably first ask, why do you think it's a bubble or a Ponzi scheme? Because there's people come from different angles. Like, have you run into anyone recently who had like a reason?
I would say it's more just people see Bitcoin and they're like, why is it worth $30,000 today? And what's the real value? Like, they don't necessarily see, like, they think of like something like a house. Oh, I can live in a house, or whatever, or equity, it produces future cash flows. Bitcoin doesn't produce future cash flows. So like, why does it have value? I think that's something that I've heard.
Yeah, exactly. That's a common one. Yeah, or like Warren Buffett, who's like, oh, I can, he said that about gold. It's like I could put all the gold in the world together in a big pile and fondle it. I can touch it, and then I can bury it in the ground, and it's not worth anything. And then the answer there is, well, the reason why gold. You could say the same thing about. Sorry, just you could make the same argument and immediately it would be ridiculous about cell phones and be like, I could pile all the cell phones in the world on a big pile and I could fondle it and then bury it in the ground and like what would it be worth, It's like, well, the value is in the network is that it's a way to connect for a lot of people. And the same with gold. Like if you gather it all in one place, you're removing the network, which is what it's all about. And so similar with Bitcoin, the cool thing is that it's like gold, but it's digital. And so you have a network where you can exchange scarcity online without being able to be stopped. Like with zero censorship, and that's the exciting thing about Bitcoin is that the borderlessness, the censorship resistance, the provable scarcity. By now we have 14 years of track record, and I always say, the people who built Bitcoin are the people who built some of the most valuable internet technologies that we have seen. BitTorrent, pretty good privacy. I'm trying to think. There's some other encryption stuff that is used all the time online, and people have contributed significantly to things like Linux and stuff that are now in the Bitcoin world. So this is just all a part of the same story, and yeah, we have um, the packages on the internet, like the basic TCP/IP protocol, and then Bitcoin is just money on the internet. Like that's just another protocol that we needed, and it's a difficult thing to figure out, and so that's why it came later than the mainstream internet.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that have trouble understanding Bitcoin don't really question like what money is also to begin with. They like I've seen some people say like, oh, Bitcoin is only worth like what someone else is willing to pay for it. I'm like, yeah, congrats. Like that's what money is, It's just exchanging a tool or a good itself, and that tool or good itself is what is the money to begin with.
Yeah, recently I saw Harari, that the author who wrote the book *Sapiens*. He's like an Israeli. I don't even know if he's an anthropologist. Maybe he is. So maybe historian. So he was talking about, oh, basically money is just a story. And so money could be anything. It could be shells. It could be, like these digital tokens. It could be, and to me, that is degrading what money really is, because of course, yes, there is convention involved, like there is a kind of a consensus involved, which you could call a story, but over history, we've seen that there are very specific properties that people converge towards, like scarcity, divisibility, like all these properties that Vijay has written so brilliantly about in his The Bullish Case for Bitcoin, Vijay Boyapati. And we just see that over and over and over, and that's for good reason, because all those characteristics make for better money. And of course, temporarily, sometimes we make trade-offs. For example, the last 70 to 100 years, the world has globalized enormously, and we were stuck with that system of gold-backed currencies, which has a real problem where you store gold-backed currencies in a vault, and then there's a war that happens, and you gotta quickly ship the gold overseas, and then it's stuck there. And then all of a sudden, all the political incentives start to change because one guy has all the gold and the rest doesn't have it anymore. And so that's why they switched to a fiat system, so that you would have more flexibility with that rapid globalization. But now we're stuck with the Anyway, it's a long story, but it was basically a compromise made. And but so Harari would say like, oh no, but it's just, it could be anything. And that is not true. That's the same as saying like a mathematical proof is just a story. It's like, well, no, it has a beginning and an end, so maybe you could call it a story, but to say it's just a story is kind of ridiculous. So that's how I feel about money.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it also goes into Saifedean's idea of Bitcoin is more like gunpowder. It's just objectively a better money that now exists because of its unique properties. And you ignoring it or not believing in the story doesn't mean that the story doesn't exist or the new tool doesn't exist. Like, it exists, and you better figure out gunpowder if someone just discovered gunpowder.
Exactly. There's a truth there, and you can ignore the truth that is gunpowder, but it's at your own peril to ignore it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, on that note of ignoring Bitcoin, we've seen El Salvador not ignore Bitcoin. Do you think other nation states are going to follow El Salvador and adopt Bitcoin?
Yeah, eventually. I think in the short term, it seems like there aren't very many that are gearing up to announcing anything big. There's not a lot of politicians right now. They're as radical as Bukele is. But on the sidelines, there's a lot, and they want to get elected, and they're going to run for office. And so we're going to see a lot of Bitcoin elections, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years. And depending on the outcome of those elections, policies are going to change. But I don't believe that there's many existing governments that are like ready to, and who knows, because politicians love to walk in front of a parade and wave the flag and, kind of, but they want to see a parade first. And so if we get another huge rally in Bitcoin, maybe combined with a government bond crash or whatever, that parade is going to grow a lot. And so who knows, maybe even existing government might start singing a different song, but that's to be seen.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Like, what do you think comes first? Do you think the price just naturally rises due to like increasing scarcity over time, and then we see, the Michael Saylor, the El Salvadors come in? Or do you think it's more of like the other way around, where Michael Saylor comes in, then the price rises? How do you see the dynamic of like people coming in versus natural price appreciation because it's the best money causing people to come in and pay attention? How do you think about that?
I mean, I think generally speaking, you could say there is smart money, and then there is more like retail money. And so the smart money tends to be leading by definition. Like they are forward thinking, they have smart friends, they try to understand the world, and then make wise investments based on that understanding. So I think that's maybe where more the organic properties of Bitcoin shine, because like the way I'm explaining, or you and I explain Bitcoin to our friends, that can start to make sense to them at some point, right? I mean, people sometimes need many conversations before the penny drops, and then as the price goes up, I think then retail is more sensitive to just price signal. Like to them, it's like, the neuron is firing, and like, oh, something's happening, I need to pay attention. And then you have a lot of influencers who do the job of like, spreading the signal through the network that is the global economy. So price is very important. Price really creates that momentum. But I do think the reason why we don't go below a certain level in the bear market, well, that's the value investors. Those are the ones that are really trying to analyze it and be like, I don't care about a 2-year time horizon. I'm investing for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So they put in the bottom.
100%. What do you think is needed or not needed for the next wave of adoption? Like, is it inevitable? Is it just a matter of time until we see like another halving, less sellers on the network, and price starts drifting up, and then we get the retail coming in? Or does there need to be some sort of catalyst that moves Bitcoin higher?
I think not. It's kind of like, it's like there's a forest, and it's so dry, and there's so much dry shrubs, and it's kind of like Yeah, we've been waiting for this like giant bolt of lightning to come out of the sky, like, and to hit like right in the big oak tree that's in the middle, like, yeah, that could do it, but there's so many ways in which the forest could catch fire. So to me, it's like it's just I don't know, a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. It's just ready. It's ready to go, and we just need a few sparks here and there, and they can come from many directions. So that's why predicting the cycle is so hard, right? Because the shrubs are already dry, and so to try and pretend to know when the spark is going to happen and from where it's going to come, I think you can't do that. That's where you got to be humble and just look at the charts, try to do some blockchain analysis and look at resistance levels and try to see like, okay, this point is where momentum would really start kicking in, and you get that flip from smart money to retail. But yeah, you can't go far beyond that.
Yeah, on that topic of dry shrubs and kind of kindle for the bull run, I always try to think of like the bear markets as like creating the dry shrubs, like just eliminating all of the weak hands and just having it to where there's not much sell pressure on the network moving forward. Do you think like going forward after we have another wave of adoption, do you think there will be another just deep strenuous bear market, or will we maybe see Bitcoin's volatility not be as extreme?
I think there's still going to be some kind of bear market, just because it's us. Like we are, the flesh is weak, and we're going to get overexcited at the top of the next cycle, or once we go past a certain point, and there'll be leverage, and there'll be, crazy fraudulent companies that are supposedly building on Bitcoin, like with the railway boom in the 1800s, right? There was like, yeah, the railways are real, but the bubble was built on top of something real. So there's so many scams, right? And then that kind of creates disillusionment after. And so I think that there's never a straight line, just because we're emotional creatures. And so but that said, in dollar terms, or in fiat terms, once inflation is really high, maybe the cycles will really happen, but it'll be more like it'll be flat in dollars for a while, and then, there'll be a bubble in something else. Like people will be like, be crazy about copper mines, and like there'll be a copper mine bubble, and or AI is actually going to have a bubble, and then, so yeah, I don't think the bubbles are going to stop. But I do think it's, in a way, it's a little bit moot to think about it now, because the world changes with the price going up, right? If Bitcoin does 10x from here or 100x, we're talking about a different world. And so it's like, I want to have Bitcoin to be afloat in that new world, and then decide what I'm going to do there, right? And then if we crash from 400,000 down to 150,000, I don't know. We'll see. See what I can decide then what I'm going to do.
Yeah, that's fair. I agree that I don't think the bear markets are going to go away. I think if we go to some crazy number, we're probably going to go back down to some also crazy number.
Yeah, the only thing is like, what do you express it in? Like, because I mean,
Yeah.
the dollar at some point is still going to stop making sense. At least the dollar as we know it today. Like in the fiat world, they always come up with like, they do rebrands, and then they'll be like, oh, but now it's back. So who knows what's going to be the next incarnation? But yeah, but this dollar, I'm not very positive on.
Agreed. It's fair. Last question, then we can go ahead and wrap it up. Tell us a little bit about some of the research that you're putting out with your firm. And I know we probably covered a good bit of the content already, but tell us about what you've been doing with Adamant Research.
Yeah, I can't be very specific, but I can say that I'm working on some things for a global audience, things that have to do with the global macro picture with investing, but also with some ideas that relate to how is the world going to change because of Bitcoin and with Bitcoin. which I just enjoy thinking about. And I don't really know. I don't know where that conversation is going to lead, but it just strikes me as both important and fun. And also, I think that there is a kind of, it's a weird thing with investing where sometimes if you too strenuously focus on it, at least for me, and then it stops being fun, and when it stops being fun, it actually is less profitable. It's a very weird thing. And so it's like if you kind of be playful and you're more loose and it's just a part of what you're doing, and sometimes you're like weirdly distracted from it, like you don't look at it for a while, and then all of a sudden you run into like you go to an event that has nothing to do with investing, and you run into the next great idea. Because if you just chase around a certain theme, you might end up being in your own little bubble, right? Because if you only talk to the same kind of people over and over. So anyway, I just both for my own entertainment, but also because I've experienced it as enriching and it kind of there's just a fun cross fertilization. I've always not censored myself from venturing into other areas, and so I'll be writing about that stuff too. So just long story short, I'm slowly making my way back to long form writing, and it'll be for a global audience, and it'll involve Bitcoin, but not be exclusively about Bitcoin.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I will definitely look forward to reading some of that stuff. I think it will be interesting to see what happens, if Bitcoin does become global money. Things will change so much, whether it's like governments, economics, society itself. I definitely agree that not enough people are thinking about like, what if we're actually right here?
Yeah, and also, it's so when you learn in school or you read about these like glorious periods of the past, like, the ancient Greeks or the Renaissance or all these periods, you kind of assume like, oh, that time must have been like everyone is comfortable and somehow there's all this wealth, and so it must have been like an extremely stable period. And then you actually read about it, it's like, no, there was so much upheaval in those periods. So I think that it's exciting for me to see this coming few decades as the beginning of a renaissance, and just to see it as something that I'm incredibly privileged to be able to witness and maybe take part in some small way. But so yeah, it doesn't have to be either we have chaos in the world or we have an incredible renaissance. Like, I think those things can happen at the same time, and I'm here for it.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. I completely agree with what you just said. That's awesome. But Tuur, thanks so much for coming on. Where can the audience go learn more about you, Adamant Research, or anything you want to share?
Yeah, just, Google my name, my Twitter will show up, and then adamantresearch.com is my website.
Awesome. Well, Tuur, thank you so much. This was awesome.